I think my guidance to people these days is I say, take your meds. And they say, well, of course I do that. And I say, no, I'm going to tell you what meds stand for. So the M stands for a positive mindset, which I think you and I have been showing each other during this talk. E stands for exercise, and I put that as not a bad second, but a very good second to mindset. And D stands for diet. I gradually converted to what I call a veganish diet, plant-based diet. So if you want a simple guidance for getting through old age in good health, take your meds, develop a positive mindset, smile, laugh, think well about the world, don't watch the news, all those sorts of things. Take plenty of exercise, the sort of exercise that suits you.
Yes.
You don't have to run marathons, but a suitable form of exercise. And a sensible plant-based Mediterranean diet.
What does it mean to keep learning and growing at any age? So Christopher Ball has spent his life exploring that question. A former warden of Keble College, Oxford, and a champion of lifelong learning, he believes that choice is our greatest tool for shaping our future. At 67, he chose to take up marathon running, going on to set a world record for 10 marathons in 10 days at 72, and founded the Brathay 10 in 10 challenge, proving movement has no age limit. Now at 90, still running over 10 miles a week, he's co-founder of the Oxford Longevity Project, working to demystify aging and promote healthier, longer lives. Today we'll explore movement as lifelong learning, what he's discovered about running later in life, and why mindset is the key to aging well. If you think it's too late to start, this conversation will most definitely change your mind. So Chris, you were born in 1935, I believe.
True.
So you're soon to be 90 years of age.
Yes, isn't that exciting?
It's very exciting. That is a big birthday about to happen. So when you were at school and when you were younger, what kind of emphasis was there on movement and exercise as part of your education?
Well, I suppose that we took it for granted. I don't remember any talk about it, but I was sent away to boarding school at the age of 9, commonplace in that generation, and this was in wartime. And we played team games, for instance, cricket in the summer, rugby in the winter, and there was plenty of movement. So I remember afternoons as being games times. Walks, I came from a family that liked to go for walks, so in the holidays, my parents took me for walks, and that was just a natural part of life. I think there was a lot of movement looking back, but nothing special about it. It was normal. We didn't have a car. My parents didn't buy a car till my father retired, by which time I was, of course, an adult myself. And I've never had a car in my life. I can't drive, nor can my wife. We promised each other when we married we'd do without a car. Now, that, of course, has driven us to a lot more movement
Absolutely.
than most people these days have. I think we did it because we were uneasy about what we called the car culture as young students. Everybody's going to want a car before long, and some people are going to have 2 cars in the family. Well, we were right about all of that.
You were.
And we just didn't like it. We thought it would spoil the country, spoil lives, and we weren't going to be any part of it. It was part of making a plan for our lives to do it our way.
Yeah.
For instance, we've brought up 6 children, 4 of them adopted. That again was part of the life plan. Slightly unusual, you might think. And those children are of mixed race. So that again was unusual for our generation. But we thought that would be a way of defeating racism by bringing it into the home.
That's very forward thinking.
I hope so. So movement has always been a part of our lives, part of our children's lives, that for that matter. Mummy and Daddy, why haven't you got a car? Everybody else has got one. You can imagine.
I can imagine with three of my own, exactly. The comparison with the friends, I'm sure. But also, did you bring up your children in Oxford?
We brought up our children in Oxford, you're quite right. And we lived in the city. They learnt to cycle to school quite
Exactly.
soon and that sort of thing.
And we are blessed in Oxford with a very strong cycling culture,
Absolutely.
which is and it's a very good sized city for walking. So there's an awful lot of walking, which also helps.
Yes. And in later adult life, when we had the time, my wife and I have done some really big, long distance walks. We've walked across England twice, the
Fantastic.
coast to coast walk in the north, and then we invented a coast to coast walk in the south and pioneered it ourselves. And
Oh, that's brilliant.
we've walked the length of England. I don't want you to think we did it all in one day. Not we did it in stages, but we've walked from the south coast to the Scottish border. So we have a sort of walking culture in the family.
And would it be fair to say that then you're both made of quite strong stuff? You're resilient people?
I hope so. Yes. It's one of the virtues I particularly admire. Do you know the American word, which they use more often? Prosilient, they like to call it, which means getting up when you fall over and moving forward at once. And I like that better than resilient, which is getting up and moaning
Yes.
about it.
That's brilliant. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to note that down afterwards. I really like that. I particularly like the sort of momentum in it. Yeah. No, that's fantastic. So your early career was, well, most of your career was in education. And
Indeed. I belong to the national service generation. I did, since you're asking about movement, I did 2.5 years in the army. It was 2 years of national service, and I was the only one, I think, in the history of national service who liked it so much that he asked whether he could do some more. And I did 2.5 years. I was in the parachute regiment.
oh wow.
Now, that involves a certain amount of movement, of course, because you jump out of aeroplanes, and when you reach the ground, there is not a lorry available to carry you anywhere. If you want to go somewhere, you jolly well march there.
Yeah.
So,
Amazing.
so that was it. I served in Cyprus at the time when it was part of what we no longer have, an empire, and walked and patrolled all over the Troodos Mountains. So that was a period again of quite intense movement.
Yeah.
And to get into the parachute regiment, you have to run races and so on and prove that you're physically
Yes.
fit and capable.
And do
That
you
was,
think that gave you skills for later in life? Did that teach you anything that did you find out things about yourself in that time?
well, I suppose it inculcates a certain amount of courage or fortitude. I mean, standing in the open door of an aeroplane and then jumping out, hoping that your parachute would open.
Yeah.
Perhaps it taught me faith in British technology, which never let me down.
Yeah. Yeah, thankfully, exactly, because you're here and you've gone on to lead an amazing life. So yeah. And I've read that about your career in education that you that one of the main thrusts of it was about lifelong learning and personal development. So, but very much about investing in the individual's capacity to do more for themselves.
That's absolutely right. You've obviously been reading the right things. I'm very impressed. Uh, yes, lifelong learning. My formula for a good life is self-reliance, first of all. If you want things to be done, rely on yourself to bring them about. Secondly, and almost contradictory to the first principle, foster a strong family, which will provide you with support and you will provide them with support. So self-reliance and a strong family, plus the lifelong learning habit, the habit of learning at every age, including mine,
Yep.
which, as you pointed out, is very nearly 90. I'm still learning, and I'd be a fool if I wasn't.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Um, and it's what keeps your mind open and looking forward. I'll just tell a little story here that my grandmother lived until 100, and the reason, I would say one of the biggest reasons, is because she was a voracious reader, and just literally was, in a book as much as she could be, a lot of the time, listening to the news, interested in people and the world, and continually learning. And that curiosity about life up until pretty much a few months, literally, before she passed away, I absolutely now see as the fuel to her fire. And it's something that certainly now, in slightly later years, I'm now 50, has definitely rubbed off on me. Um, and there was lots of other things, like she loved gardening and she had dogs and walked dogs and she loved nature. So, it was the whole package as well. But yeah, I thought that, to your point. And I've heard you talking as well about the importance of choice. I've heard you say in our talk at the Oxford Aging Summit that I met you at last year, that for people to learn effectively, you believe there were 3 influences, and they were nature, nurture, and choice. And so you've talked really about nurture, particularly in terms of family and the way you go about things. But the choice, the element of choice, I think is perfect and fascinating, because I think it's what a lot of people don't feel they have. So would you like to talk a little bit about what you see as choice in people's lives?
Absolutely. Well, I think the interplay of those 3 principles, um, what we are and how we are because of our nature. We're born with instincts, the instinct to survive, and we spend a lot of time ensuring that we survive. Um, we're born with an instinct to create another generation. So, for most of us, there comes a time in adulthood when we start thinking about creating our own family or not. It's a choice, and that's where choice does come in. But our instincts, our nature, means that we breed, and if it wasn't there, then the species would die out if we all decided not to have any more children. Um, and choice is uh, what comes third, because in between comes nurture. And by nurture, I mean not just the parents looking after you in early childhood, but the whole business of education and learning what it means to be part of society and society's norms, and then gradually seeing that perhaps, like us with the car, you don't want to conform 100% to the society's norms. Perhaps 95% will do for you, and you'll carve out a little area to make your own choices. Now, understanding those 3 things, the force of the instincts, which are always there. One of our instincts, by the way, is to die.
Mm.
Again, to make room for the species to continue. Think how awful the world will be if old people never died. Um, Fatal. So we are creatures, like all living creatures, that instinctively develop, flourish, and then die. But we have a culture which thinks that death is a terrible thing as opposed to a perfectly normal thing. And one of the things I think is important is balancing the cultural view of death. Oh my God, she's died, with
Mm.
the fact that, Well, of course she has. We're all going to. Um, Being reconciled to one's own death. A man approaching 90 perhaps can say this. I'm quite reconciled to my own death. It will happen. But in the meantime, I'm determined to make a good and useful life and continue to contribute and to enjoy. And that's where choice comes in. As you rightly say, it's a question about choice. Enlarging the area of choice as we go along and making good choices and discussing with yourself and with other people what your good choices should be. Should you have children?
Yeah.
Each person must make their own choice. That's a very big one. What should you devote your life to? I devoted my life largely to education. I have no regrets about that. Should I have stayed in the army? What an interesting question to look at. I chose not to. I could have done. But I thought I had something else to do with my life. Everybody should be identifying choice and thinking about it from time to time and reviewing their own choices. I lived my life in 9-year chunks, and coming up to the age of 90, it's the end of one chunk and the beginning of another. And the beginning of another means I must make a plan for the years from 90 to 99, ask myself what it is I choose to do. So I've got quite a strong discipline about that. I'm going to write my memoirs, by the way. That will be boring for you.
No. I disagree. Absolutely not. I think that as we're going to go on to hear, they will be fascinating, especially as I know that you're also a great writer. Tell me one thing. Why 9-year chunks?
Why 9-year chunks? I think probably I came to this plan in early adulthood and realized that 0 to 9 for me had been childhood, and then being sent away to boarding school was the beginning of serious schooling. I'd had 2 or 3 years with my mother teaching me at home. This was wartime, and it was all part of childhood. And then you go to school and you discover a new way of learning and a new discipline, of course. So 9 to 18 was schooling. And then I got interested in the idea of, it's a French word, formation, our word formation. But the French use it to mean that period of growth and learning and development between 18 and 27, which we think of perhaps as the training period. But training is what you do to other people or what other people do to you. I'm interested in the personal learning that takes place as we enter adulthood in that critical period. And we brought our children up and they said when they got to 18, now we're grown up. And I said, no, you're not. Not in this family, you're not. You've got to do another 9 years before we'll count you as grown up.
And I think that's so true. And actually, physiologically, your frontal cortex, that for boys particularly, I think that hasn't even developed until 25, 26 anyway.
Absolutely.
And actually, looking back, that was a moment in time in your life, in the way that you see your own development and how you see the world and yourself in that world. I think it definitely sort of starts to shift at that point. So I'm quite intrigued by your 9s. I think, has it been difficult in between to kind of remember when you're at a 9? Are you good at your 9 times table?
The universe is very kind. Having explained to the universe that I was going to live it in 9 years, the universe has done it. So there came a point when I was 45 and I was, to my surprise, elected to be head of an Oxford college. And it ended a 9-year period and began an extremely interesting further 9-year period. After 9 years, I thought this isn't a job for a grown-up, being head of an Oxford college. This is just sort of early retirement. I can't be doing with that. So I resigned from that job and became self-employed. That was a new start again. So the 9-year thing has become a routine for me.
That's interesting. I wonder if it's embedded in any sort of religious or spiritual world, the nines. It's fascinating. And you don't even know about. Just taking a quick pause because I want to tell you about a new offer exclusively for listeners of this podcast. If you'd like to improve your mobility, strength, and learn more about moving well in daily life now and to train for your 90s, come and move with me in the Reclaim Movement membership. There's weekly live coaching in term time with hundreds of replays available, as well as hordes of 5 and 10-minute mini movement videos to follow throughout your day. I'm offering you a 15% discount on your first month's membership on top of the 7-day free trial. Go to reclaimmovement.co.uk/membership to create your account and quote the code podcast15. Let's move together to feel better and keep doing all the things you love. Let's move forward now, because the thing that really caught my eye, as a lot of people, is your story about taking up running. So prior to your late 60s, you hadn't been a runner per se. Is that correct to say?
That's correct. I went to see my doctor when I was age 67 because I'd once had a job as a lecturer at the University of Oxford, which said that my retirement age was 67. So it got stuck in my head that 67 was some terribly important age. I wondered what the hell to do with it. I thought, well, I'll go and have one of these medical checkups. And the doctor said, you're slightly overweight. Still true, by the way. And you're not as fit as you should be. Right. And I said, well, what am I supposed to do about that? And he said, eat less and take more exercise. So on the way home, I thought, eating less is too difficult. It isn't. Turns out to be easy. I've been learning to do that more recently, but I was wrong about it. So I better take some more exercise. I better start running, because that was my idea of exercise. And I ran 3 times a week until I got reasonably fit. And then one day I found I'd run 10 miles without stopping. And I was so pleased with myself that I entered for the London Marathon for the following spring and ran it and completed it. At the end of which, you'll be amused to hear, I lay flat on my back in a London park with the family clustered round in concern. Are you all right, Daddy? No, I said, I'm not. And if I ever show a sign of running another marathon, please shoot me.
Really?
They remember it. Well, I did show another sign of running a marathon. I got interested in the idea of back-to-back marathons. You do a marathon on Monday, and then you get out of bed on Tuesday and do another one. And I thought I must try that in training. And I started to run down the Thames path from the source of the Thames. And I did my 2 marathons in 2 days. And I thought, gosh, I could do a third. And I went on until I'd done 7 and got to Tower Bridge.
And can I just do an age check? So this is at 70?
Yes, I was in my 70s by now. And that's quite right. So I did 7. The family again was impressed. My wife was quite sure I would kill myself and was possibly a little disappointed that I hadn't. But they were all very proud of it. And my wife then made what she thinks of as one of her mistakes. On the car home, one of our daughters drove us home from London. And she said, darling, just as a matter of interest, could you do another marathon tomorrow? I'm wondering how you're feeling after 7. And I said, actually, I could, but I've done a deal with my brain and my legs. Yeah. 7, and that's it. And it would be unfair to do it. She said, I get that. Would you do an 8th? I said, I think I could do an 8th, yes, and a 9th. But if I had to do 10, I would surely die. And she said something along the lines of, well, I should hope so. In a wifely way. And the thought stayed in my mind. What would happen if you did 10? So I founded the 10 in 10 challenge and was one of the first people in the world to do it. In Cumberland, it's a marathon run around Lake Windermere.
So it's also off-road
It's partly
It's
off-road, partly road.
partly, yeah.
One
So
of the toughest road marathons
yes,
there is
trail
in the
running as
country.
well.
So I got another 6 people who wanted to try it. They didn't think they could do it either. So there were 7 of us in that first year.
And what age were they?
Oh, they were all much younger.
I was
Well, a
going to say.
reasonable age. But I was never last of the 7.
Really?
There was one who said, "Chris, I know you're Sir Chris, and if I ever catch you, I'm going to take your knighthood away from you." But that was an incentive.
Yes. Go, go, go.
Anyway,
Goodness.
we did it, and they've been running it, the 10 and 10 challenge, every year since then. We're coming up to the 30th year now, I think, 20th year, perhaps it is. And we raise money, of course. We've raised £1.5 million for the college that does it, and about 150 people in the country, including many women, and of course, as you'll realise, Wendy, have done the 10 in 10. And it's counted as one of the 3 most challenging long-running events in the world, which I'm rather proud of.
Absolutely. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. And the very fact that you're doing it for such a wonderful cause, if I can, because obviously I've done my reading about it, I just want to say that it's a charity, to give them a shout out, a charity that focuses on youth development, leadership, and outdoor learning. And the headquarters are in Brathay Hall in Ambleside, in the
Correct.
lake, in the UK's Lake District. So it's obviously a really, really wonderful initiative. And you've raised, between you all, you've raised a huge amount of money for it, and which is also incredible because and I'm sure it becomes easier when people see that it's 10 marathons in 10 days. Then obviously there's not that many participants, I presume, on an annual basis that do it, in terms of, in comparison to a normal marathon. I say normal. um, and therefore people must just be so inspired by such a challenge that they really, really want to back it. So it's a great initiative, and you were part of you were a founder of that, I believe.
I'm the founder and the patron of the club, as you can imagine. There's a lot of competition to do it now. They only allow 15 people a year to do it.
Oh,
It's run every year, and 15, and you get selected for it, obviously, fitness and all that.
yes.
And so, and the people who make the choice were talking to me the other day about it, and saying with a smile on their face, "Of course, we wouldn't choose you. You're not fit enough. You're too old." I said, "But I founded it."
Yes. Surely you have a lifelong pass for it.
Well, I'm going back this year to celebrate my 90th birthday. I'm doing a 10K run with them, just to show I can
Amazing.
still do it.
Oh, brilliant. Oh, that's fantastic. So what have you learned about running longer distances at an older age?
Well, first of all, that you can do it. That's great. You've got to be careful. The training needs to be careful and thorough. I'm at the moment running 3 times a week, um, about 4 miles each time. It's got to be 6 miles by May, which is when I'll do my 10K up at Brathay. But I'm well on track for it. Um, I'm wondering whether to run with sticks. I've got walking poles, and at my age, running with poles might be a good idea, but I don't do it yet.
And but I believe, again, in terms of training, it's really important to train that running style, because it is quite different with sticks,
It is.
as walking is with sticks. So yeah,
Yes, that needs some training. So
yeah.
I'm still thinking about whether to do it with the sticks or without the sticks. My daughter is going to come with me, my eldest daughter, and we've agreed that since we're going to be the only 2 doing the 10K, she's going to let me win it, so that once in my life I can win a race.
That's so kind. So in terms of movement, do you see movement and exercise, because I like to talk a lot about movement, and moving through daily life, and encouraging that as much as exercise, because I believe it holds as much importance as we age. Do you see movement also as a form of lifelong learning?
Absolutely. I think my guidance to people these days is I say, take your meds. And they say, well, of course I do that. And I say, no, I'm going to tell you what meds stand for. So the M stands for a positive mindset, which I think you and I have been showing each other during this talk. Um, and if people want to know what I mean by a positive mindset, go back to the beginning and watch it all again.
We can discuss it more. Absolutely. Go on. Go on.
E stands for exercise, and I put that as a not a bad second, but a very good second to mindset. And D stands for diet. I gradually converted to what I call a veganish diet, plant-based diet. So if you want a simple guidance for getting through old age in good health, take your meds, develop a positive mindset, smile, laugh, think well about the world, don't watch the news, all those sort of things. Take plenty of exercise, the sort of exercise that suits you. You
Yes.
don't have to run marathons, but a suitable form of exercise
And
and a
sorry.
sensible plant-based Mediterranean diet.
And in terms of mindset, because I do think it is a really important element that it's kind of talked about a lot in terms of mental health, of course, and relationships and so on. But in terms of its ability to help you to access things like movement and exercise, or equally diet, and be open to them. It's such an important element of aging positively, I suppose. I've heard you say, I think it was on stage last year, about avoiding the Victor Meldrew mindset, which is clearly, again, it's a saying for only a certain age group, which I am in. But it's avoiding the bar humbug and the victim and the negative, and the world owes me something, and rather being much more go out and get it and be positive, and use that positive attitude to help yourself to live a full life. um so would you say that mindset is number one in your meds for that reason, that it opens the other pathways?
I think that's entirely right, Wendy. Being being positive means making the choice, going back to an earlier word we've been sharing, making the choice to take responsibility for your own feelings. Now, I live in a world where I meet quite a lot of people who behave as if, and indeed talk as if, um, their feelings are imposed upon them by other people, by events, and so on. So, let's take an external event that we have to consider every day, the weather.
Yeah,
Oh, look at the weather. Oh, it's a terrible day. Well, if you say to yourself it's a terrible day, it probably will be for you.
absolutely.
Um, the weather is the weather. Um, don't think of it as a terrible day. Just put your raincoat on and enjoy it. Take responsibility for your own feelings.
And
And make that choice. Absolutely
yes,
critical to the positive mindset.
yeah.
You mustn't let externals, and that means mostly other people, impose feelings on you. You know the kind of conversation. Everybody is saying this. Don't you think it's true? Well, stop
Mm,
and consider and make your choice.
yes, absolutely. And in terms of you've just been talking in a way that I think everyone can resonate with, because it's so prevalent. Um, so how do you, um, or not how do you, but what advice would you give people who are hearing what you're saying, really want to uh, take choice and sort of take agency over their lives, but struggle potentially with the people very close to them, even in their closer circles who don't quite have the same mindset? What advice would you give them?
Well, feelings are rather like germs. We pass them on to each other. Um, and so it's a good idea not to surround yourself unnecessarily with the victim elders, the depressed, miserable people. Of course, if they're close friends and family, you have to do that. But remember, it goes two ways. And if you're cheerful and happy and smiling and making the best of a rainy day or whatever
Yes.
the current challenge is, they have a choice. Uh, they see you smiling, and they might think, I could be like that too. So
Yes,
interact with other people and try and share your happy life. Not in the way of aren't I clever,
no.
but just signaling that it's possible to be happy with the present political situation in the world, as it were.
Yeah.
And the reality of global warming and all the things that might make us feel,
Yeah.
I don't know, miserable and suicidal.
And things, you touched on there about global warming and so on. I know you're passionate about that. I think um, celebrating nature um, is a way of doing that, because when we, particularly, I find I'm an avid walker. I had to stop running because I got into years of chronic pain, and found out that it's not for my body in that way, even though I loved it.
Mm.
But now that passion has transferred to walking. And just as you were speaking, we were talking about the weather, and that sort of interaction. This morning, my walk, it was pouring, and I couldn't have been happier because I was out walking in nature. And I remember the headmistress at my boys' school used to say, give a smile, get a smile. And I've always held on to that on walks, because you pass people and you have a moment of opportunity for interaction with someone you don't know. And the best way to do that is, at the very least, for it to be a smile. And it's very hard. It is very infectious, because it's hard to be smiled at and not smile back in some way, or at least your eyes brighten because you've been smiled at. And yeah, slightly tangential from being out in nature, but that's a way to help combat um, global warming, and to educate ourselves, is to be in nature more and to be moving through nature more, because then we appreciate it more and we want to look after it in different ways. So then when we are interacting with people and trying to be more positive, we can use those as tools to um to I'm waffling a bit now. Tools to get involved in something that's important to us, like you're saying.
Absolutely, Wendy. I so much agree with you. I've got a routine in the morning, which gives me a lot of pleasure, and I'm quite sure does me a lot of good at the same time. So I get out of bed around 7 o'clock and go downstairs to make my wife a cup of tea, which I take her in bed. That's how our day starts. But when I'm downstairs, I have my shower, my sauna shower, which is as hot as I can bear it, for half a minute, and as cold as I can, well, as cold as it's possible to get, which is pretty cold in winter, for another half minute. And then I come out of that, put on my pajamas, you'll be glad to hear, and go out into the garden with bare feet,
Yes.
and without my glasses on. And I look at the sky and enjoy the very fact of the sky, which is a marvelous thing. Whether the weather is rainy or not, I do this. I walk about on the grass and I count the 10 trees that I can see from our little garden around us in the middle of a city, because trees are a most wonderful creation. And so I come back into the house pleased with the natural surroundings, with my bare feet having had the,
Yep.
the grass
Yes.
directly under it, as if I was a man from the Stone Age.
Yes. Absolutely.
Come back into the house and gratefully put on my socks, my bed socks again, and take the tea up to Wendy. This is a good routine. It makes me smile every day. Smile at being such a silly old man, and smile because it's so good for me.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And uh, I, I know social media is not your thing. I know phones are not your thing, but especially in the winter, I post a video of me in my barefoot walking across the frosty grass, because there's nothing more invigorating and there's nothing that can make you feel more alive than that contact and that cold as well
Absolutely.
from the earth,
I'm,
and just being out.
I'm already imagining you in your nightdress.
And just to say, by the way, when you said take up tea to Wendy, that is because, just for the audience listening, that is because Chris's wife is also called Wendy.
That is indeed true.
Just to avoid any confusion there.
Yeah, we better put the record straight.
Yes. The reason that I found out about you and managed to have the really wonderful opportunity of listening to you on stage was through the Oxford Longevity Project, which you are co-founder of with Leslie Kenny, who's also been on the podcast, that you have the Aging Summit in June, which I am going to be attending again this year. So it's very, very exciting. And I wanted to just talk about a little, I don't know if I'm sure you remember, a little video I took of you, because I had my round mats there and I had my balancing beam. And you were one of the few, and one of the first to come over and say, I'll give it a try. And that was that mindset, that coming into it. That was I'm going to see an opportunity and I'm going to take it. And I talk to people a lot about the world as our playground and the importance of seeing our environment around us as something that we can interact with for fun and move for fun. And you came up and you challenged me and said, I know that for longevity, it's really important to get off the ground without using your hands. So I'm going to show you. And I don't know if you remember that you allowed me to video you, and Sir Muir Gray was watching on, and you did so incredibly. Now I don't know if your wife told you, because I put it on an email, but I got the numbers a little wrong. I put that onto social media, credited you, and said how talked about your running career and so on, and it went to 2.4 million people. Can you believe? With a lot of incredibly inspired comments. So good. So your inspiration has gone far and wide. I just wanted to let you know about that one here. But so this project that you're involved in, you've become very interested in longevity and the healthy lifestyle. You've already talked to us about taking your meds, as you call it, and your mindset. Aging is obviously a really interesting topic because there's a lot of thought processes around it. So there's a lot of narratives around it that are quite pervasive in society that are not necessarily very beneficial. What would you say is one or several misconceptions about aging that you would like to correct?
Well, I suppose the most important one is that I think we live in a culture, and it's not very surprising that it's so, which sees aging as deterioration, as a tragedy, which ends with an even greater tragedy, death. And now, my early teaching on the subject of people who actually want to learn how to cope with their longevity is fall in love with it. Aging is a fascinating process. Reconcile yourself. This is going to mean quite an effort for lots of people. Reconcile yourself to the inevitability of your own death and plan to make it an adventure.
Yeah.
Age should be an adventure. Okay, it's an adventure like going into a jungle, and it is quite dangerous, and you never know what's going to come leap out from behind the next tree, and things will leap out and happen to us. But approach it as one of the great adventures of life positively,
Yeah.
and recognize that your own death is inevitable and be reconciled to it. And for God's sake, don't moan on about it as if somehow other people don't have to face it. The truth is, we all do. So
Yes.
I think that would be the first thing to say about healthy aging. Reconciling yourself to death, taking responsibility for your own health. There's another word beginning with R, reconciliation, responsibility. You are responsible for your own health. Consider how to do it. Start by taking your meds, as I was explaining earlier, and then build on that.
Yeah.
And the third R, develop a regime for yourself, one that works. How often are you going to take your exercise? For me, it's a run 3 times a week, and it's exercises in the house, including getting up off the floor without using my hands, for the other
Absolutely.
the other 3 days. But I have a regime, so
Yeah.
develop your own regime. And I think if you hold on to those 3 R's, to be reconciled to old age and the inevitability of death, that's probably the hardest one for most people.
Mm.
To be responsible for your own health and well-being, it's down to me. I can choose to be happy or not.
Yeah.
And having a regular regime, you don't have to have cold showers in the morning, but by God, it helps if you do.
Well, I'm a cold water swimming addict now, and so I love the cold, having absolutely hated it most of my life. It's quite an addictive thing, isn't it? Really,
It is indeed.
it is. It is. Um, so, one slight throwback question is that you obviously had a long career in education. How do you think schools and universities could promote movement better than they are at the moment?
Schools, well, the schools that I'm involved in, and there are several I'm involved in, do, to my mind, take exercise seriously, encourage the children to get out into the open air, have frequent breaks. Organized team games still exist in schools. I'm glad to see. Um, so I think it's tremendously important, and I think we know from educational experts who do research that regular exercise is good for the brain development as
Yeah,
well as for the body development.
yeah,
Um, I think that's true. Universities, I think, would take the view that they focus on the development of the mind, usually in a rather specialized area, um, and that they assume that since everybody is 18 plus, they're all adult. But as we were saying earlier, there's
no,
quite a lot of development to go on between 18 and 27,
yeah,
for that 9-year period of what I call formation. Um,
yeah. And then flipping back then to adulthood, what would your advice be to someone who has listened to this, hopefully is inspired, was already along the right lines, let's say, but who wants to stay active into later life, but they don't quite know where to start, because perhaps they're a little overwhelmed, or they kind of think, okay, so he took up running, but I'm not like him. So where how would you advise people to just get started?
well, the easy answer to that is the park run. Wherever you live, you're not too far from a park run. I live a kilometre away from the university parks in Oxford, and go there from time to time and do the 5 kilometre park run. Now, the one I did in November, which was the first one I'd done, I came last. But they're very kind because they have a person who is behind you.
Yes.
And at the end, she says, "Well done, Christopher," to me. And then she says, "How old are you?" And I tell her, and she says, "Well, you're very good for your age." And so you go away thinking, well, I may have been last, but they're all so blooming young. That's okay. So
Yes.
the park run is a good way of getting started.
Yeah.
I would say quite simply, and for most people, that's a possibility.
Yeah.
And of course, if you do it once or twice, you decide you don't want to go on being last, and so you practice a bit during the week.
Yeah. And I believe you can walk, run it. You don't have to run the whole way. You can
Thank
take it
God you can
moderately
indeed
pace.
walk run it. You've sussed me out.
I've done the when I was running, I did the Oxford Town and Gown a couple of years, and I really think I should have picked park running instead because that was more like a dash. It was incredible pace, but obviously there were a lot of students in that as well.
Yeah.
I felt very left behind very quickly. But lots of fun. So tell me, because of your attitude to life, your next 9 year chunk is about to commence. What next?
What next? Well, I'm going to do 3 runs during my 90s. This year it's 10 kilometres. At 95, I'll do 15 kilometres up in the Lake District, and at 100, I shall do 20 kilometres. So I've set myself running targets. I met another lovely woman, Wendy, um, on a cruise ship earlier this year, and we were chatting about this kind of subject. And she said, "Do you know the rule?" And I said, "Which rule is that?" And she said, "You must have a goal beyond the goal." And I love that. I love that
Yes.
idea that you set yourself a goal and then you set one beyond it.
Yes.
So I've got 3 running goals now. The goal beyond the goal. I'm already thinking of the run I'm going to do when I'm 95 and the one I'm going to do when I'm 100. Um,
And that's all about breaking it down into smaller steps, actually. And that is the way to get started, because when we see I can't remember the exact phrase, but when if you see the whole set of steps, you're overwhelmed. It's too high. But if you see the first step and then you
yes,
just move to the second step and slowly to the third step, then you're climbing and suddenly you're up looking back and thinking, wow, I did that. So yeah, I really like that. That's a wonderful way of looking at
yes.
it. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that I think is the challenge of exercise. And I'm running for 10 different charities, all of which are collecting sponsorship for their own work, including big ones like Oxfam and
Brilliant.
Autistica. We had an autistic child, and so I'm very interested in the care and treatment of people with autism,
Oh, that's
of
brilliant.
course.
Brilliant.
So there are 10 charities who are latching onto my runs and going to raise money.
Which is also another good bit of advice, because then you have some accountability to others. And I think that's what Parkrun does beautifully, because you agree to meet people there, or people who are there hope and expect you to turn up and wonder if you're there. And then you have camaraderie and so on. And I think those are key ingredients to helping you continue with something, because completely expecting yourself to do it on your own is hard.
Absolutely. Part of that healthy mindset we were talking about earlier is fostering your loving relationships. And there need be no great limit to your loving relationships. As you were saying, I loved your story of smiling at strangers in the street. I do that too. And it's surprising, in a way, how often it leads to a conversation. People
Yeah.
actually stop
Yes.
and say, "I've seen you here before."
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
What are
tell
you
me about
doing?
yourself. Yes. Yes.
And
What on earth are you doing running? Yes.
a smiling conversation.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
foster your loving relationships, obviously the close ones.
Yeah.
Make a cup of tea for your wife in the morning, as we were saying earlier, or whatever.
Must tell my husband that one.
Yes, don't tell him I'm responsible.
Oh, wonderful.
Uh,
Well, Chris, this has been a really magical conversation. I've been really grateful for your wisdom. And I think it's really important that these types of conversations are shared because you are living proof that with a great attitude about life, that regardless of what you're doing in your life, you can have a very long, fulfilling life. And you've had some incredible achievements, but I'm sure that some of your more sort of normal achievements of having a family and being married and enjoying the outdoors, I'm sure those type of achievements are just as important to you, which I can tell that they are. So thank you so much for sharing that inspiration, because mindset is infectious. And I believe that you have infected us beautifully today.
Well, thank you, Wendy, for inviting me to talk with you like this. I've enjoyed every moment of it, and I hope other people will enjoy some of it too.
Absolutely, they will. Thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed listening, and if you have, you can help by doing 3 things. First, press the follow button to tell podcast platforms you want to listen again. Second, please give the show a 5-star rating and leave a review about why you liked it. And third, I'd love you to share it with friends and family or on your socials, for which I'm truly thankful. Finally, if this podcast is making you want to start reclaiming your own movement, join me in the Reclaim Movement membership for classes, both live and by replay, and countless videos of mini movement breaks to add into your daily life, covering practical and fun, important natural movements. Visit reclaimmovement.co.uk/membership to get started with your 7-day free trial. See you for the next episode, and thank you so much for listening.